This is a fictional story created to help you breathe, reflect, and restore your inner peace. This story is not about escaping life, it's about returning to it. Hey there, if you've been working too hard, sleeping too little, answering emails during lunch, or feeling like life is passing while you're stuck in meetings, this story is for you. Take a deep breath. You don't need to do anything right now, just listen. This is your pause, your reset, your permission to be still. If this resonates with you, follow this series. New chapters drop soon. And maybe let someone else hear this too. Because sometimes we all need a reminder that we are not machines. We're human. Now let's begin. Elijah Brandt lived by the clock. He wasn't always like that. Once upon a time, he had dreams, lazy Sundays, and laughter that didn't come from a polite chuckle in a corporate hallway. But years in the grind of corporate America had worn him down slowly and quietly like a shoreline being eaten away by the tide. Now he woke each morning not to a sunrise, but to a schedule. He was the vice president of strategy at one of Chicago's most competitive marketing firms. His calendar was booked 3 months in advance. His alarm rang at 5:35 a.m. sharp, giving him just enough time for a quick shower, a protein shake, a glance at the stock market, and a 10-minute meditation app that he never really listened to. Then came the car, the highway, the 32 floors up the glass tower, and the start of another day dictated by Outlook notifications. Elijah didn't think of himself as unhappy. That word was too big, too messy. No, he was functioning, productive, focused. But every now and then, like when he caught a kid laughing in a park as he sped by in an Uber, or when he looked at his reflection in the elevator mirror and barely recognized the tired eyes staring back, something inside him whispered, "This can't be it." Still, he kept going, because that's what everyone did, right? Then came the Thursday morning everything stopped. He woke up late. That alone was odd. The alarm clock on his nightstand still blinked 6:47 a.m. He tapped the screen. Nothing. He checked his phone black screen. He muttered a curse pulled on yesterday's shirt and rushed downstairs. The microwave clock also said 6:47. He didn't have time to question it. He was already late. The sky outside looked paused, not frozen, but somehow untouched, like it hadn't been stirred yet. The streets were unusually quiet. A soft fog hugged the ground and the city lights blinked like distant memories. He got into his car. The dashboard clock also said 6:47. It was then he noticed his smartwatch, the Rolex he wore daily, had stopped too. Same time, 6:47 a.m. He laughed nervously, trying to shake it off. Coincidences, glitches, whatever. The traffic light turned green, but no cars moved. He blinked. The light turned red, then green again. Still nothing. He looked to the sidewalk. A man holding a coffee cup was stuck mid-sip. A dog frozen mid-leap. A cyclist hovering in balance, tires off the ground, time robbed of gravity. Elijah stepped out of his car. His breath was visible in the still air. Everyone was paused, like the whole world had been caught between 2 seconds and couldn't push through. Except for him. His heart thudded in the silence. No car horns, no buzzing phones, just the wind brushing leaves that didn't fall. He walked among the frozen city like a ghost in his own life. Inside a cafe, a barista hovered mid-laugh, espresso cup tipping. The smell of coffee was fresh, too fresh. Nothing had faded, and yet nothing moved. Then it came. A voice. But not from around him. From within. It wasn't a booming God voice. It wasn't dramatic, just calm, clear, close. Now that time has stopped. What are you rushing toward? Elijah turned, expecting someone behind him, but there was no one. Just the wind. Just himself. His mouth went dry. "What are you rushing toward?" it repeated. And this time, he heard it differently. Not as a question from someone else, but as a question he hadn't let himself ask. Ever. He stood there in the middle of the city that had taught him to sprint, hustle, and sacrifice. And for the first time in decades, he didn't know the answer. He wandered the city through frozen parks and halted intersections. He watched pigeons hang mid-flight and people caught mid-conversation and mouths half open and aware they'd been paused. The deeper he went, the quieter his mind became. No notifications, no reminders, no noise. Just silence. And in that silence, a strange warmth. Not comfort exactly, but a loosening, as if the tension he'd been carrying across his back, shoulders, chest was beginning to slip away. He passed by a mirror inside a storefront window. And this time, when he looked at himself, he saw more than the crow's feet, the expensive tie, or the weariness behind his eyes. He saw a man who had been running for so long, he'd forgotten why. And maybe, just maybe, this moment was not a glitch. Maybe it was an invitation. The city was still frozen. The clock still blinked 6:47 a.m. Elijah had wandered for what felt like hours, though, without a working phone or watch time had lost all meaning. That should have terrified him. But strangely, it didn't. Instead, he felt lighter, as if something inside him was beginning to settle like dust after a long storm. He had passed familiar streets now, alien in their stillness. He'd walked by the bakery that used to remind him of his mother's kitchen, the one he hadn't visited in years because his schedule didn't allow it. He passed the little bookshop where a woman he once loved had taken him on their second date. That was 3 promotions ago. They hadn't spoken since. He'd spent his life chasing deadlines and somehow outran the present entirely. That's when he saw it. A bench, placed in the middle of the plaza by Lincoln and Third, a place that to his knowledge had never had any seating. It was an open area surrounded by corporate buildings, glass towers, LED billboards. No benches, no trees, just concrete and capitalism. And yet, there it was. A wooden bench, weathered, simple, facing nowhere, standing in the middle of frozen time. Elijah blinked. It wasn't a hallucination. He could feel the grain of the wood as he ran his fingers along it. The bench was real. Too real. Like it didn't belong to woo this world at all. But what truly stopped him wasn't the bench, it was the note. Folded neatly on the seat. No envelope. No name. Just his initials printed in clean handwriting EB. He looked around. Still no movement. The dog across the street was still mid-jump. The cyclist's wheels were still hovering inches above ground. No one else could have placed it. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the paper and unfolded it. Inside, just one line. Sit. You've been standing too long. He froze. It wasn't a command. It didn't even feel like advice. It felt like truth. For some reason, it hit him harder than any executive briefing performance review or heart-to-heart he'd ever had, because it was right. He couldn't remember the last time he had truly sat not at a desk, not during a meeting, not in a boardroom chair. He meant sitting for no purpose. Not to wait. Not to present. Not to strategize. Just to be. He looked at the bench again, and slowly, almost reverently, he lowered himself onto it. And something inside him sighed. The silence wrapped around him like a warm blanket, not suffocating, not loud, just still. And in that stillness, Elijah heard something else. His breath. It had a rhythm. Slow. Deep. As if it was trying to remind him of something ancient. And then he noticed something strange. The buildings around him, the towering giants of productivity, began to look smaller. Not physically, but in significance. Like they were no longer the center of his world. Like they were just buildings. A small sparrow landed on the bench's far end. It moved. It was the only thing besides him that wasn't frozen. The bird blinked at him, tilted its head, and pecked once at the benchwood before flying off again. Elijah chuckled. It was the first genuine laugh that escaped his chest in years. He couldn't remember the last time something so small had made him feel so human. And just like that, in the quiet and the stillness, a simple truth floated to the surface of his mind. You can't feel life if you're always outrunning it. He leaned back. And in that moment, he wasn't a vice president. He wasn't a schedule. He wasn't a walking resume. He was a man sitting on a mysterious bench in a world that had finally shut up long enough for him to hear himself. And the voice from earlier, that internal whisper, returned. Not as a question this time, but as a reflection. You've given your life to things that never loved you back. He closed his eyes. And for the first time he allowed himself to mourn, not for someone else, but for himself. For the years lost to productivity, for the mornings missed, for the conversations cut short, for the hugs avoided, for the moments he never knew he needed, until they were gone. He didn't know how long he sat there, but when he opened his eyes there was something new. The fog had lifted slightly. The sun was peeking through the clouds, and though everything was still paused, Elijah felt movement not in the world but within. A seed had been planted, and suddenly he wasn't in a hurry for it to grow. Elijah left the bench eventually. He didn't want to. A part of him, the part that hadn't spoken in years, wanted to stay there forever. But something tugged at him. Not urgency, not panic. Just a quiet curiosity, like a hand gently pulling at his sleeve. He stood up slowly. The city was still frozen in time. The same dog mid-jumped the cyclist, forever airborne, the barista suspended in laughter. But the silence was no longer heavy. It had shifted into something sacred. As he walked, he noticed details he'd never seen before. A crack on the sidewalk shaped like a lightning bolt. A child's shoe tucked beneath a newspaper stand. The tiny smile on a sleeping baby's face in a stroller paused forever at the corner. The world without its rush was unspeakably beautiful. He turned a corner he didn't remember being there. A narrow alley between two office buildings that hadn't existed yesterday, or perhaps had always been invisible to his distracted eyes. It was made of red brick and quiet shadow, and at the far end of it a hallway, an impossible hallway. Not an alleyway, not a back entrance, an actual hallway like something out of a dream, clean, dry, lit by soft overhead bulbs, stretching on far longer than the city should have allowed. On both sides doors, dozens of them, each one closed, each one different. Wood, metal, glass. Some were ornate with carvings of birds or suns, others plain industrial, almost cold. No numbers, no names. Just doors. He stepped inside the hallway. The city faded behind him. No traffic noise, no frozen people, just the hum of something old and watchful. As he walked past the doors, he felt things. One door painted deep blue made his chest ache. Another iron and rusted made his palms sweat. He passed a tiny green one that smelled like pine needles and birthday candles. He didn't touch any of them, not yet, but he knew instinctively that these weren't just doors. They were memories, choices, moments he'd buried beneath his busy life. One by one they whispered to him, "You remember me, don't you?" He reached a white wooden door with a brass handle, simple, familiar. The moment he stood before it, he heard music. Faint piano notes, clumsy but heartfelt, leaking through the wood. He knew that song. He used to play it poorly when he was a teenager. The song he wrote for his mom on her 50th birthday. The one she clapped for even though he missed half the notes. His throat tightened. He hadn't touched a piano in over 20 years. This door didn't ask permission. It didn't wait. It creaked open slowly, almost kindly. Inside a room. Not in the present, not exactly the past, more like a preserved moment held in soft amber. There was a boy, 16, lanky, awkward, hunched over a keyboard, trying to get the bridge of the melody right. The room smelled like warm soup and laundry detergent. From the corner, his mother, younger, vibrant, fully alive, watched with a smile that could have held the universe together. Elijah's hand reached out, trembling. He couldn't enter. He knew that. This wasn't time travel. But the door let him stand there. Let him feel. The boy at the keyboard never looked up, but somehow Elijah knew he wasn't alone. A tear slipped down his cheek. Not from sadness, not even from longing, but from some forgotten love for that boy, for that woman, for that life. He whispered, "I'm sorry I forgot this." The music inside the room softened, as if it hurt him. Then gently the door began to close, and Elijah let it. He kept walking, past more doors, more memories, some beautiful, some painful, all true. One door had his wedding ring hanging from the knob, another had the sound of a baby crying on the other side. Yet another had silence, not the comforting kind, but the kind that stretches between two people who used to be in love. Each door asked the same silent question. Have you lived, Elijah? Not worked. Not performed. Lived. He stopped at one final door. It was cracked open just slightly, just enough for light to spill out. This door didn't seem old. In fact, it felt recent, like it had just appeared. Elijah leaned in. Inside was his current office, frozen in time. Him at the head of the table talking strategy, his team watching, nodding, smiling politely, and him smiling back, but with eyes that had given up years ago. He studied that version of himself. The suit, the perfect tie, the scripted confidence, but no spark. He remembered that day, and it was just last week, a Thursday morning pitch meeting, his most successful campaign in years. He had gone home that night, eaten a microwave dinner, and fallen asleep in his chair. The door whispered, "Is this what you want the rest of your life to look like?" Elijah stepped back, and this time he closed the door himself. As he stood in the hallway, surrounded by every door he had never opened, every version of himself he had forgotten, he felt something shift. Not in the hallway. In him, a loosening, a return. Elijah stood in the hallway, surrounded by locked memories. Each door now quiet, still. They had done what they came to do, stir something awake inside him. And a boy who once played piano with clumsy fingers, a young man who made promises under stars, a husband who slowly stopped showing up, a father who missed the recital because of a client dinner, a man who over time had become less a person and more a title. And at the end of this impossible hallway, past all these unspoken truths, stood a single figure, a man waiting. He wasn't old, but he wasn't young either. He wore no suit, no tie, just a plain open-collared shirt and rolled sleeves as if he'd come straight from somewhere real. He looked familiar. Elijah couldn't quite place it, But something about the man's posture, his gaze, his stillness, it mirrored something deep within him. Not who he was, but who he might have been, or might still be. The man didn't speak right away. He just looked at Elijah with eyes that didn't need explanation. And when he finally did speak, it was with the kind of voice people remember for a long time after they've stopped hearing it. "You've been running a long time." Elijah swallowed. "I thought I had to." The man nodded. "That's what they told you." Elijah Brandt, the man continued, vice president, strategist, performer, fixer, machine. Each word landed like a slow hammer. But not father, not friend, not son, not alive. Elijah's breath hitched. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't even judgment, just honest. And sometimes honesty hurts more than anything else. Elijah looked down at his hands. "I didn't mean to forget who I was." "You didn't forget," the man said gently. "You buried it. And every time you said yes to something that didn't matter, you said no to something that did." They stood in silence for a long while. The hallway hummed quietly, a breath between two heartbeats. Then the man turned slightly, revealing something behind him. A door. But not like the others. This one was new. Still forming, its edges flickered slightly like it was being painted by light and shadow at once. There was no knob, no lock, just a soft golden glow. "What is it?" Elijah asked. The man looked at him. A choice. A choice to return to everything exactly as it was, or to change it. Elijah frowned. "How I can't undo what I've done." "No," the man said, "but you can start listening to what you've been trying to tell yourself for years." Elijah looked into the glowing door. He saw flashes. Not visions, not memories. Possibilities. Him not in a suit but in jeans and a sweater cooking breakfast with someone he loved. Him laughing with a child on a rainy day. Him painting something badly on a blank canvas, smiling because it didn't have to be perfect. Him present. Imperfect, but whole. He turned back to the man. "Who are you?" The man smiled. "The version of you that stayed alive while you weren't paying attention." Elijah blinked. He understood now. This wasn't some guide or guardian. This was him. The version he left behind. The voice he silenced to chase productivity. The soul he locked in a room to make room for his resume. A single tear traced Elijah's cheek. He stepped toward the door, but paused. "What happens if I walk through?" The man smiled. "You begin again, not from scratch, but from truth. And if I don't, you go back to everything you knew. Same life, same meetings, same numbness. Time will resume. Nothing will have changed. Except now you'll know." Elijah felt something break open inside him. He remembered the feeling of grass beneath bare feet. The sound of laughter, not forced. The freedom of creating something no one needed to approve. He remembered himself. And for the first time in a long time, he wanted that more than a raise. More than a title, more than control. He stepped forward, and the moment his fingertips touched the golden light of the door, he breathed. Not the shallow, task-driven breath he'd taken for decades, but a full inhale. Clean, deep, alive. The door opened, and the world shifted. The first thing Elijah noticed was the sound. Not an alarm, not a notification, not the buzz of a fluorescent office light. It was birdsong. Real, unfiltered, unscheduled birdsong drifting in through an open window he didn't remember leaving open. He opened his eyes slowly. The ceiling looked the same. The room was the same bed, same dresser, same gray carpet, but something was different. It wasn't the room. It was him. Elijah sat up. The Rolex on his wrist blinked 6:47 a.m. He held it in his palm. For the first time in years, he wasn't concerned about the time. He didn't rush to check his calendar, didn't instinctively reach for his phone. He just sat. He noticed the softness of the sheets, the warmth of the morning air, the way light filtered through the curtains like honey. And for a moment he thought, so this is what morning is supposed to feel like. He made coffee slowly. Not the pre-programmed timer brew. He actually boiled water, measured grounds, waited. He sat by the window as it brewed, watched the clouds shift, listened to the silence between the city's usual hum. It wasn't that the world had changed. It was that he had, because he finally showed up to it. There was a part of him that wanted to believe what happened in the frozen world, the bench, the hallway. The man at the end was just a dream. But he knew better. Something had been real about it. He could still feel the texture of the wooden bench beneath his fingertips. Still hear the faint echo of the piano notes from his youth. Still see the soft flicker of that glowing door. He hadn't imagined it. He'd lived it. And now he had to live this for real. Elijah opened his laptop. The calendar blinked at him, stacked meetings, back-to-back calls, unread emails, piling like digital dust. For a moment his fingers hovered over the keyboard, automatic muscle memory, years of reflex. But instead of diving in, he did something radical. He paused and asked himself a question now no one in his world ever asked. Do I actually need to do this today? He stared at the screen, then slowly, deliberately began to remove things. He canceled a meeting that never needed to happen, declined a Zoom call that had already been an email, rescheduled a client pitch that could wait, and then the biggest leap, he blocked out a 3-hour window with a title he'd never used before. Breathe. He walked outside. No briefcase, no earbuds, no rush. Just him. The wind felt cooler than he remembered. He stopped at a corner bakery he hadn't stepped into in a decade. The same woman still worked behind the counter, her smile unchanged. "You look different," she said, handing him a coffee. Elijah chuckled. "I feel lighter." She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe the world was full of people who had once remembered how to breathe and were just waiting for someone else to exhale first. He took his coffee to a small park near Edwell, one he used to pass every day but never entered. There was a bench beneath a maple tree. Not the bench, but a bench. Ordinary waiting, still. He sat. No reason, no goal, just to sit. He watched a toddler chase a pigeon. A young couple nap beneath a blanket. An old man feeding squirrels like they were lifelong friends. And for the first time since the hallway of doors, he felt something begin again. Not productivity, not planning, but presence. The phone buzzed in his pocket. He took it out. A message from his assistant client is upset you missed the call. What should I tell them? Elijah stared at the screen. The old version of him would have crafted an apology, promised to reschedule, logged in immediately. But the new version of him, the one who sat with his 16-year-old self and watched him fumble through piano keys, the one who walked the hallway of locked doors and closed them gently, the one who heard the words, "You've been standing too long," that version took a breath and replied simply, "Tell them I was living. We can talk tomorrow." Elijah put the phone down, leaned back, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he had nothing to prove. No fire to put out, no identity to protect. Just time, unmeasured, unclaimed, his. Elijah always thought healing had to look like effort. Therapy appointments, self-help books, spiritual retreats in the woods, some grand declaration of transformation. But that wasn't how it happened for him. His healing began on a bench, continued with a cup of coffee, and now, without fanfare or applause, it showed up again, in the silence. Not in some mountaintop breakthrough, but in a small moment standing outside his sister's house for the first time in 5 years. He hadn't spoken to her since their father's funeral. Something about a disagreement over the estate hurt feelings buried under polite text messages, and I'm just busy excuses. He used to tell himself it didn't bother him, that they'd both moved on. But here now, staring at the faded blue door and the familiar porch light, he knew that was a lie. He hadn't moved on. He'd just moved away. The door opened before he could knock. It was her. Her expression froze in something between confusion and disbelief. Elijah. He offered a small smile. "Hey." She looked him up and down. "What are you doing here?" "I was nearby," he said awkwardly. Then added, "I've been thinking about Dad lately, and about us, and how long it's been." A long pause. Then something broke in her. Not anger, not relief, just years of quiet weight she'd never put down. "I made coffee," she said. "Want some?" He nodded. And just like that, they sat again, two people who had stopped being siblings because life convinced them to be everything else first. They didn't talk about the fight. Not at first. They talked about their dad's laugh, about how he always made pancakes too thin, about how their mom used to sneak chocolate chips into hers when he wasn't looking. They talked about the treehouse Elijah helped build when they were kids, and how it collapsed 3 weeks later because he never measured the nails. She laughed, a real one. Elijah hadn't heard that sound in so long, it felt like finding an old photograph you thought you'd lost. They didn't need to dissect the pain right away. Sometimes you start healing by remembering what made the connection worth saving in the first place. Later that evening, as the sky dimmed and the air cooled, she said something he wouldn't forget. "You seem different," she said. "I feel different," Elijah replied. "What happened?" He thought for a long time, then answered honestly, "Time stopped. And I finally noticed what kept going anyway." She blinked. "That's poetic." He smiled. "No, that's grace." In the days that followed, things continued to shift, not dramatically, not all at once, but like sunlight slowly creeping into a room long kept dark. He reached out to Mason, a college roommate he hadn't spoken to since their falling out over a startup idea. "Hey," Elijah had written, I'm sorry for what I said back then. I wasn't really living in those years. I'd like to reconnect if you're open. The reply came within minutes. I've been waiting for this message for 6 years. He visited his mother's grave. Brought her flowers she liked not the ones he always defaulted to. He sat down in the grass beside her and played that same piano melody in his head. I forgot how to live, Mom, he whispered, but I'm learning again. And I think you'd be proud of who I'm trying to become. He even stopped by the community center he used to volunteer at. The kids didn't know him, of course, but the director did. Elijah Branch, she smiled. Back from the dead. Something like that, he replied. He offered to help with the after-school program, not for networking, not for a tax write-off, just because it mattered. And for the first time in years, someone looked at him and said, "Thank you. You're really good with them." He hadn't realized how much he missed being useful in a way that didn't come with an invoice. He still worked. But differently now. Meetings had boundaries. Emails ended at 6 p.m. And in his planner between strategy sessions and calls, there were new entries like, pick up fresh bread, call Mason back, sit at the park bench, watch sunset. He no longer treated those like luxuries. He treated them like oxygen. And here was the most surprising thing of all. The less he tried to fix his life, the more his life started to mend itself. Because once he stopped trying to win at everything, he finally gave people and himself permission to be human again. And in that humanness, love returned. The letter came on a Tuesday. Elijah almost didn't check the mailbox. Most days it was nothing but ads, bills, and subscription catalogs he didn't remember signing up for. But something nudged him that morning, soft familiar like the echo of a voice he hadn't heard in years. He opened the mailbox, and there it was, a single white envelope. No return address. Just his name written in a hand he would have recognized anywhere, Elijah. His breath caught. It had been 10 years. 10 years since Julia left. Not in anger, or not in some dramatic blowout, just in quiet exhaustion. She had waited, tried, asked him to be present, to be real, but he was married to momentum. Loyal to his calendar. Faithful to a future that never arrived. And one day she packed a suitcase and left a note that said, "I miss you, but I miss myself more when I'm with you." He never wrote back. He didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to stop sprinting long enough to feel what it meant to lose someone who had only ever wanted his presence, not his perfection. And now, this letter. He held it for nearly an hour before opening it. There was no bitterness in the handwriting, no tremble. It was steady, clear. And what it said undid him. Dear Elijah, I don't know if this will ever reach you. I don't know if you're still running, but something told me you might not be. Lately I've been thinking about the mornings you made coffee with too much sugar and not enough time. How you used to hum when you didn't know I was listening. How your eyes would soften when you saw street performers and forgot you had a meeting in 5 minutes. There was a version of you under all that pressure, and I loved that version. Not the titles, not the driven machine. You. And if you found your way back to him, I just wanted you to know he was always enough. Always. Take care of yourself, Elijah. With gentleness, Julia. Elijah folded the letter slowly, his hands shaking. He didn't cry right away. He just sat on the floor by the window and let the words settle into the spaces inside him that had been empty for years. She had seen him the real him, even when he had forgotten how to look. And even in absence, she still offered grace. Later that day, he returned to the bench in the park, the one under the maple tree. He didn't bring his phone. Didn't bring a book. He brought only himself. And the letter! As the sun angled through the leaves, something cracked open in him. Not painfully, this time gently. Like a curtain finally being drawn after a long, dark season. He looked around at the world children laughing. A man teaching his daughter to ride a bike. A woman sitting cross-legged with a journal, her brow furrowed in deep thought. It was all ordinary, and yet it felt like a miracle, because this time he was present for it. As the breeze picked up a leaf detached from the tree and drifted downward, Elijah reached out his palm and caught it without trying. And in that moment he realized something he never could have understood before. Healing doesn't come from forcing the light in. It comes when we stop patching the cracks and let the light come through. That night Elijah did something he hadn't done in a decade. He took out his old keyboard from the back of the closet. It was dusty. One key stuck slightly, but his fingers still remembered. He didn't play perfectly. He didn't have to. He played softly, just enough to fill the room. And right in that melody, raw, crooked, beautiful, he felt closer to himself than he had in 20 years. The idea came to him as he was putting away the keyboard. It had been a good evening. The notes were messy and his fingers stiff, but he played for over an hour. No audience. No performance. Just a man remembering how to make sound without needing to impress anyone. He moved to slide the keyboard back into the hallway closet when he noticed the corner of something beneath an old winter coat, something small wrapped in worn birthday paper with a yellowed ribbon still barely holding together. A box. He froze. He remembered it immediately. He had wrapped it himself. Rushed as always. 3 days after Julia's birthday. It was meant to be an apology for missing dinner, for forgetting the card, for arriving late and mentally somewhere else. Again. But he never gave it to her. It had sat here ever since. Through all the seasons, through her leaving, through promotions and performance reviews and lonely holidays. He knelt down and picked it up gently like it might fall apart in his hands. The paper crinkled softly like it had waited all these years for someone to finally remember it existed. He sat on the couch and unwrapped the gift. Inside a necklace. Simple. Silver. A small charm in the shape of a compass. Because he remembered now she once told him years ago on a lazy Sunday, "Sometimes I feel like I'm wandering without direction. But when I'm with you, even the wandering feels like home." He had bought it the next day, back when he still listened with his heart instead of his calendar. But by the time her birthday came around, he was deep in a project barely present at the celebration, and overwhelmed with deadlines. He wrapped the gift 2 days late, then forgot. Elijah stared at the necklace in his hand. The charm caught the light, gently soft, worn, delicate. And then just like that, he began to cry. Not from guilt, not from self-hate, but from mourning. He mourned the man who had meant to show up but never did. The man who almost remembered. The man who had good intentions but lost them beneath layers of noise. But he also cried from something else, something new, because this gift hadn't disappeared. It had waited. And now it was here, whole, undelivered, but real. He didn't know where Julia lived now. Didn't know if she was married, if she'd changed her name, if she would even accept a letter from him. But he knew one thing. Some things need to be sent not for the sake of the past, but for the dignity of the present. For the healing that comes not from fixing, but from honoring. He wrote a note. It was short. "Julia, I found this tonight. It was always meant for you. I never gave it and I won't ask for anything by sending it now. But I just wanted you to have it. You helped me feel like home even when I couldn't feel myself. You deserved more than what I was back then. I'm learning now, slowly. Thank you for seeing the part of me I'm finally beginning to meet. Take care, Elijah." He mailed it the next morning. No tracking number, no message to say, "Did you get it?" Just trust. That afternoon he walked through the city with an ease in his shoulders he hadn't felt in years. He noticed colors. He stopped for a busker playing violin and dropped a few dollars without rushing off. He watched a man kiss his partner's forehead at a stoplight and smiled to himself. And for the first time he didn't feel like he was late to his life. He felt exactly on time. That evening he lit a candle in his apartment, not for anyone else, not for mood or his appearance, just because it smelled like orange peel and something that about it made him feel like someone was home. And he sat, not to think, not to plan, not to fix, just to be. And in that stillness the room felt full not of noise but of meaning. Because when you give a gift, even one long delayed, you aren't just offering something to someone else. You're freeing a part of yourself that's been waiting to be released. The message came through just as Elijah was rinsing dishes, the sound of warm water running over ceramic like soft static in the room. One new email. He hadn't been checking obsessively like he used to. There was a time when an email ping felt like a fire alarm, but lately he'd let things come as they came. Still, something about this one felt different before he even opened it. Subject line dinner. Sender Avery C. His chest tightened, a gentle kind of tightening like the thrum of an old song played too quietly to disturb anyone else, but loud enough to wake something in you. Avery. The last woman he dated after Julia. They had met at a local art gallery opening. She was vibrant, present, unafraid of stillness. She'd challenged him not with arguments, but with how unapologetically alive she was. How she'd sit in silence and sip coffee with the same reverence most people reserve for grand achievements. She liked long walks without destinations. She once told him the best conversations happen after the first comfortable silence. He hadn't known what that meant back then. He wasn't ready. Still too wrapped in spreadsheets and scheduling apps and the echo of just 5 more minutes that became 5 more years. Avery had stayed for a while, and then quietly she didn't. They never had a dramatic goodbye. Just a series of increasingly delayed replies. An unanswered birthday message. Silence growing like ivy between them. And now this. A single email, a question. He opened it. Hi, Elijah. I hope this isn't strange. I heard from a friend that you stopped by the community center last week. I almost didn't believe it. But something told me. Maybe you're different now. No pressure, truly. But if you ever want to share a meal that isn't rushed, I'd love to catch up. No expectations, just presence. Friday, my place, 7 p.m., you know the door. Elijah stared at the message. His first thought was, what do I say? Then he caught himself. That voice, the one trying to perform, to craft the perfect response, was the old Elijah. The one who used conversations like negotiations. This time, he didn't overthink it. He simply replied, yes, thank you, I'll be there. Friday came. He arrived at her door 5 minutes early. Not out of anxious politeness, but because he'd learned lately that being on time's the simplest way to say you matter. He wore a sweater instead of a blazer. He carried flowers he picked out at a local stand not ordered online. They were slightly mismatched in color, a little wild but real. He knocked once, lightly. She opened the door and smiled like the city had never broken their rhythm. Elijah. Avery. She accepted the flowers with a small smile, then let him in. Her apartment hadn't changed much. Soft lights, plants that looked loved, not just decorative, a faint scent of rosemary and something roasting in the oven. He felt himself relax before he even sat down. They ate slowly, talked gently. At first, just surface things, what they had been up to, books read, places visited. Then, like the slow undoing of a knot, they went deeper. Avery asked, do you remember what you said the night before we drifted apart? Elijah winced gently. I said I didn't have time to talk about feelings. She nodded, not unkindly. And now, he looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in so long didn't flinch from the invitation of being known. I have nothing more important to do tonight than feel what's true. Her eyes softened. That's all I ever wanted from you. He nodded. I know, he said. I just didn't know how to give it back then. They talked for hours. Not as lovers trying to rekindle. Not as strangers reminiscing. But as two humans walking each other back to the moment. At one point, she stood up and lit a candle in the middle of the table. I like having a flame in the room when the truth starts showing up, she said with a small laugh. They sat in the glow for a long while. He asked her what she was most afraid of lately. She said, forgetting who I am when things get loud. And when she asked him the same question, he answered honestly, I'm afraid of becoming the man I once was, and not noticing when I do. She reached out gently, touched his hand, and said, then promise me something. Anything, he replied. When the world starts speeding up again, don't try to match it. Later, as he walked home under a sky cracked wide open with stars, Elijah felt something he hadn't in years. Hope. Not the hope of something happening, but the hope that comes from knowing you're already becoming. The apartment was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that waits to be filled. Not the silence of absence or boredom, but a stillness so complete it felt holy. Elijah stood in the center of his living room, mug in hand, the morning light sliding in across the floor like a slow invitation. No plans. No calls. No one expecting him. Just a Sunday. Unstructured, unclaimed. And for the first time in years, that didn't scare him. He had spent most of his adult life fearing silence. Silence meant he had missed something. Forgotten something. It reminded him of failure, of inefficiency, of all the things not yet done. So he had drowned it with meetings, music, multitasking. He had filled every gap with noise so that stillness wouldn't catch up. But lately something had shifted. The silence had stopped feeling like an enemy. It had started feeling like a presence, like someone kind and quiet who simply sat beside him and asked nothing in return. That morning Elijah turned off his phone. He didn't even announce it. No out-of-office message, no status update, just off. He brewed tea instead of coffee, watched it steep. He remembered how Julia used to say the waiting was part of the flavor, how rushing tea was like skipping the sunrise to get to breakfast. He never understood it then. He did now. He sat on the floor with his back against the wall, the tea warm in his hands. No music. No TV. Just the soft hum of a life around him, birds in the distance, wind brushing the windows, the faint creak of the building settling into the day. And inside him a silence that wasn't empty. It was full. Full of all the things he used to run from and had now learned to welcome. He thought of his father. How at the funeral Elijah had stood stiffly at the podium giving a polished eulogy full of facts born here, worked their love crossword puzzles, but never once mentioned the time they sat in the garage for an hour after his first breakup not speaking, just passing a soda can back and forth like some sacred ritual. That moment had said more than 1,000 polished lines ever could. And now he understood. Love lives best in spaces we don't fill. Later Elijah stepped outside with no destination. He walked for miles, past the busyness of cafes and Sunday brunches, paused to watch a street artist sketch portraits without speaking, sat on a bench beside a woman knitting, neither of them exchanging words. It was like he had entered a different layer of the world, the layer that had always been there beneath the urgency waiting. In the late afternoon, he wandered into a second-hand bookstore he'd passed 1,000 times and never entered. There was no one inside but a quiet old man behind the counter reading. Elijah browsed without aim. His fingers ran along spines and titles until one thin volume caught his eye. The Art of Sacred Quiet. He opened it. The first page read, "Most people fear silence because it is the only mirror that doesn't flatter, but those who sit with it long enough find themselves returned." He bought it, gently, like he was adopting something sacred. That evening he cooked a simple meal, chopped vegetables slowly, let the pan sizzle without distraction, ate by candlelight not because he was sad, not because he was romanticizing anything, but because, why not? And as he finished his meal, he realized he had spoken to no one all day, but he had never felt more heard. There was no grand moment, no breakthrough or tears, just a quiet sense of being okay, of being enough, without performance, without productivity, without needing to be anyone but the man who had finally learned to sit in his own stillness and call it home. That night Elijah wrote just one line in his journal. Today the silence wasn't empty. It was me. It started with a breeze. Not a gust, not a storm, just a soft push of morning air through the apartment window. Elijah had forgotten to close the night before. It fluttered the pages of his journal, rustled a receipt on the kitchen counter, and stirred the scent of yesterday's candle back into the room. And with it came a sound. Soft, broken, like someone somewhere close was crying. Elijah paused. It wasn't intrusive, it wasn't dramatic. It was human. He walked over to the window, now open wider than before, and leaned out slightly. His apartment faced the courtyard where morning light filtered through half-blooming trees and laundry lines. Below near the second-floor unit, a woman sat on her fire escape. One knee pulled to her chest, the other leg dangling loosely. She was still, barefoot, holding something in her lap. Her face was turned just enough for him to unnotice not full sobbing, not performance. Just quiet grief. Real. He hesitated. He'd lived in this building nearly 12 years. And in all that time, he couldn't remember saying more than hello to most of his neighbors. He knew their routines when the older man in 3C took out his trash, the sound of the woman in Fave rehearsing opera, but not their names, not their stories. The idea of interrupting her, of intruding on someone's raw moment felt dangerous. But then again, so did doing nothing. He disappeared into the kitchen and came back with 2 mugs of warm tea, climbed down the inner stairwell to the second floor. He stood for a long moment in front of her door, then gently knocked. No answer. So he did something unexpected, something unpracticed. He stepped outside to her fire escape mug in hand and said quietly, "Hi, I'm Elijah. I live upstairs." She looked up, startled, red-eyed, unsure. He held out the mug. "I don't want to bother you. I just heard something. And I figured maybe you'd like company. Or tea. Or neither. Both are fine." She stared at him, trying to decide if this was a trick. Then slowly she reached out and took the mug. "Thanks," she whispered. Her voice was tired, worn. He sat down beside her, a respectful distance away. For a while they just sat. No introductions. No advice. No attempts to make her feel better. Just quiet, shared. Eventually she spoke. "Today's his birthday," she said. He waited. "My brother," she added. "He passed 2 years ago. I thought it would get easier." Elijah looked down at his tea. "I used to believe time healed everything, but lately I think it just teaches us how to carry it better." She nodded gently. "That's closer to the truth." They sat in silence again. It didn't feel heavy. It felt held. Her name was Lena, a painter. Moved in during the pandemic. Lost her brother to cancer during lockdown. It said she hadn't really talked about it much, didn't want to become the grief girl. Elijah didn't try to say something wise. He just listened. And when she laughed, half embarrassed, half relieved about crying on her fire escape, he said softly, "There are worse places to be seen." Before he left, she smiled and said thank you. For the tea. For showing up. He nodded. "Thank you for leaving the window open." Back upstairs, Elijah sat at his table. He thought about how many people, even in a single building, live full aching lives just feet from each other. And how often we hide. Because vulnerability feels like weakness. But sometimes the smallest crack, a window left open, a quiet knock, is all it takes for light to find a way in. That night he wrote in his journal, "Grief isn't something to solve. It's something to share." And below it, "Sometimes we don't need answers. We just need someone to sit on the fire escape with us." The invitation had been taped to his fridge for weeks. Mason and Kelly Baby's first birthday Saturday. 3 p.m. Eastwood Park. Picnic tables by the lake. He remembered when it arrived hand-delivered by Mason himself with that half-joking, half-serious warning, "You better show up this time." Back then, Elijah had smiled, nodded, and said wouldn't miss it. But today, it was 2:41 p.m., and he was still in his apartment, still in sweats, still battling the whisper in his head that said, "You don't belong there, you're late, again." He stared at the fridge. The paper shook slightly in the AC breeze like it was breathing. He almost let himself believe he was too tired. Almost told himself he'd send a message promise to make it up. But something stopped him. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't obligation. It was memory. He remembered the photo from a few years ago, the one Mason had sent him after Elijah missed his wedding. A picture of 2 champagne glasses clinked in a blurry toast. No people, no faces, just a caption. "We saved you a seat." It gutted him more than any angry text ever could. Elijah changed. Quickly, quietly, no overthinking. He grabbed a simple gift from the closet, a stuffed owl wrapped months ago for another event he never made it to. He drove with the windows down the breeze, washing over his face like a reset button. The city moved as it always did, in busy streets, honking horns, laughter tucked between intersections. But this time Elijah wasn't watching it from the outside. He was inside it, moving with it, present. The park was easy to find. Balloons, toddlers, folding chairs, laughter. He scanned the group unsure for a moment. And then Mason spotted him. He didn't say anything, just grinned. Then walked over and pulled Elijah into a bear hug that said everything words didn't need to. "You came," Mason said. "I'm here," Elijah answered. And he meant it. The afternoon passed in that magical way that time does when it's not being chased. Sunlight filtered through leaves. Kids played. Someone spilled juice and no one got upset. A couple of uncles tried to grill hot dogs and burned half of them. It was beautiful in the way only imperfection can be. Kelly came over at one point, holding their daughter Bright Eyes, 2 bottom teeth cake on her face. "She likes you," Kelly said as the baby reached for Elijah's shirt collar with curious fingers. Elijah laughed. "I'm honored." Kelly looked at him for a moment, noticing something. "You seem softer," she said, "in a good way." He nodded. "I feel softer, also in a good way." Mason tossed him a beer, and the two of them sat on a picnic bench, legs stretched out, watching the kids tumble across the grass. For a while they didn't talk. Then Mason said, "Remember that one summer we swore we'd build a treehouse and never grow up?" Elijah chuckled. "We built the floor and gave up after 3 planks. Still the most ambitious thing I ever did at 16, Mason grinned. They paused. Then Mason added more seriously, "I missed this version of you." Elijah turned toward him. "I missed me too," he said. As the sun dipped low, the party began to wind down. Families packed up strollers and coolers. Laughter became yawns. Goodbye hugs lingered. Mason walked Elijah to his car. "You coming to the cookout next month?" he asked. Elijah smiled. "I'll be there, early this time." Mason grinned. "We'll believe it when we see it." Driving home, Elijah didn't turn on the radio, didn't check his phone, didn't need anything else. He felt full, not from food, from being part of something. And as he parked, stepped into his quiet apartment and turned off the lights, he whispered softly to himself, "I showed up. I really showed up." And for a man who used to live everywhere but the present, that was no small victory. It had been locked for over 6 years, not with a key, not with bolts, but with something heavier, avoidance. At the end of the hallway in Elijah's apartment there was a door, a room he used to call the music room, back when he still believed in leisure and late-night piano sessions and dreams that didn't involve bottom lines. But after Julia left and his father passed and the business grew teeth he couldn't control, the room had changed. It became the storage space. The graveyard for unopened mail, outdated devices, donation boxes never delivered. He used to pass it daily without noticing, but lately something had been calling him back. That morning he stood in front of it, coffee in hand, barefoot. Just him and the silence. He didn't touch the handle at first, just stood there. It was strange how the body remembers. His chest tightened, shoulders curled slightly inward. That familiar reflex like something in the room might accuse him if he entered. But nothing spoke. Just the light beneath the crack in the door. Still, waiting. He turned the knob. The hinges groaned, not from resistance, but surprise. Like even the door had stopped expecting to be opened. The smell of dust, cardboard, forgotten air, and under it all, a faint scent of old wood and sheet music. He stepped inside. Stacks of boxes lined the wall. A cracked mirror leaned in the corner. A guitar case sat unopened under a drop cloth. And in the far left corner, the piano. Still standing, still upright, still whole. A little out of tune, maybe, but alive. Elijah walked to it. He didn't dust it off first, didn't prepare. He just sat down, pressed a single key, A soft, unsure note echoed into the stillness. Then another, then a third, and before he knew it, his fingers were moving. Slowly, awkwardly, but with intent. The song wasn't perfect, but it was familiar. It was the same melody he'd written years ago for no one but himself, the one Julia used to hum while cleaning, the one his dad once asked him to play again during a stormy night when the power went out. That song, still inside him. Not gone, just waiting. As he played, something inside him cracked. But it didn't hurt. It released. Years of pressure, of proving, of pretending. And underneath all of it was a younger version of himself, wide-eyed, open-hearted, and still very much alive. After playing, he opened the old bench. Inside, a mess of sheet music notes scribbled in the margins, even a dried flower pressed into a journal. He found a letter addressed to himself, dated 2013. He had no memory of writing it. He opened it with trembling hands. Dear Elijah, if you're reading this, it means you've forgotten what matters. Forgotten the sound of things that don't make money, but make meaning. I know you're chasing something, and I hope wherever this letter finds you, you've remembered that the chasing isn't the point. It's the being, the playing, the moments between ambition. Come back to the music, even if you play badly, because every time you do, you'll find me again. Love you. He sat there a long time after reading. Didn't cry. Didn't rush to journal it. Didn't make a post about it. He just sat in the truth of it. That room, once a place of avoidance, had become a sanctuary again. Not because anything changed inside it, but because he had changed. That afternoon he cleared a corner, placed a small rug, lit a candle. He didn't clean the whole room. Didn't try to renovate. Just made space. Space for music, for quiet, for returning. That night he wrote only one sentence in his journal. Sometimes the scariest door leads to the most beautiful room. The email subject line read, "Let's talk big opportunity." It was from Darren, Elijah's former business partner. Same guy who used to measure time in billable hours and thought balance was a luxury for people who didn't want to win. They hadn't spoken in almost 3 years. Not since Elijah walked away from the firm with a half-empty box and a heart full of noise. Back then he left quietly. No speech, no slam of the door, just a deep breath in an elevator that felt like an escape pod. Now Darren was reaching out. Elijah didn't open the message right away. He let it sit. He went for a walk, made coffee, watered his plant. And for the first time in years he realized something profound. The world did not collapse in his absence. And more importantly, neither did he. When he finally opened the email, it was brief and full of flattery. "We're scaling. Massive growth. We want you back, senior partner, flexible terms. You've always been the heartbeat of this place. Lunch on me. Let's talk." Elijah stared at the screen. Once this would have lit him up. The title, the invitation, the validation. But now it felt like someone offering him the keys to a house he no longer lived in. He met Darren anyway. Not because he was tempted, but because he needed to look the past in the face and not flinch. The restaurant was all sleek edges and exposed beams. Exactly the kind of place he used to call home base. Darren stood when Elijah walked in, arms wide, voice loud. "Elijah, my man, damn, you look relaxed." Elijah smiled. "That's the nicest thing anyone's said to me in a while." They talked. Small talk at first. Then Darren laid it out. "They still ask about you, you know. The interns quote your old frameworks. You were a legend." Elijah nodded, sipping water. "I was also exhausted, and angry, and lonely." Darren paused, unsure how to respond, then shrugged. "Yeah, well, comes with the territory, right? You don't get the mountaintop without some windburn." Elijah leaned back. "No," he said gently. "You don't get peace by chasing wind." Darren looked confused. "Elijah, this is the dream. Power, freedom, money. Power over what Elijah asked. Freedom to do what money to buy, and what I don't have time to enjoy." The table went quiet. Darren chuckled nervously. "Man, you've changed." "I had to," Elijah said. "Otherwise I wouldn't be here. I'd be a ghost in a corner office." They finished lunch. Politely. Darren offered one last pitch. "Think about it. Clock's ticking." Elijah smiled. "That's the thing, Darren. I don't listen to clocks anymore." He walked out into the sunlight, and for a moment he stood still. No rush, no agenda. He felt the breeze on his face. Felt his own heartbeat calm, even sure. And in that stillness he remembered something Avery once told him. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not go back. That evening he sat in the music room. Played a few notes. Not to prove anything, not to be great. Just to feel. And as the light dimmed outside, he closed his eyes and whispered to the quiet around him. "This is my life. Not the resume version, the real one. Then he lit a candle and wrote in his journal, "I didn't restart the clock. I reclaimed my time." It was exactly 1 year from the day he left his old job. Elijah didn't mark it with a red circle on the calendar, didn't throw a party, didn't even tell anyone. But he remembered. Not as an anniversary of quitting, as the quiet birth of something he never knew he was missing. The apartment was different now. Not bigger, not flashier, but softer. There were signs of life everywhere. A half-read book on the arm of the couch, a bowl of lemons on the windowsill, the faint smell of lavender from a candle burned halfway down, and the piano. It was no longer just in the corner. It was part of the room. Used, loved, alive. That morning Elijah opened his eyes before the alarm, except there was no alarm. He had stopped setting 1 month ago. He woke when his body woke, slept when he was tired, a rhythm he'd long forgotten, the rhythm of being human. He brewed tea, stepped barefoot onto the small balcony. The city moved around him like it always had, but now he didn't feel like it was racing ahead. He felt finally that he was walking with it. Not ahead, not behind, just present. He sat with his journal, not to plan, not to fix, just to reflect. And in that moment he noticed the old wall clock. It had stopped ticking months ago. Not suddenly, just slowly. One day it lagged by 5 minutes, a week later 10. Eventually it just stopped, and he never replaced the battery. Never needed to. At first it bothered him. Then it became a joke. Now it was art, a relic of a man who once let seconds measure his worth. Elijah stood, walked to the wall, took the clock down gently, turned it over in his hands, and smiled. He walked it out to the curb, not with bitterness, but like a graduation. A thank you to a past that had carried him as far as it could. He placed it by a box labeled free, left it under the morning sun, and walked away without looking back. Later that day, Lena knocked on his door. She held a basket of scones. "They're not fancy," she said, "but they're warm." He laughed. "That's all I ever asked from life now." They ate on the fire escape. Talked about nothing. Watched a toddler in the courtyard try to chase a pigeon and lose his shoe instead. Everything was slow, and because of that, everything mattered. That evening he sat at the piano, played without thinking. The melody was new. It had no name, just feeling. And when he was done, he looked at the keys. Not as tools, but as companions. He opened his journal and wrote his last words for the day. There is a life beyond achievement, a richness that begins when urgency ends. The clock didn't break. It just became quiet enough for me to hear myself again. He closed the journal, blew out the candle, and stood in the doorway of his own life. Not waiting, not measuring, just living. And this story was created to help you breathe, slow down, and maybe reclaim the parts of yourself the world told you to rush past. If it touched something in you, if it gave you a moment of stillness in a busy day, share it with someone who needs that pause too. Subscribe to the channel for more soul-soothing stories. And remember, your worth is not measured in productivity. It's in your presence, it's in your peace, it's in your becoming. We'll see you in the next story. Stay soft, stay human.